I'd like to introduce Heinrun Skåldal from the Institute of Marine Research, traveled all the way from Norway, who's going to lead us through session number 1.
Well, thank you. I'll try to speak without a microphone, so does my voice carry to the back road, the higher levels of this room? Okay. So in this session, which was supposed to be chaired by our colleagues Alf Hakon Hoel, unfortunately he wasn't able to come here, and so I'm stepping in. We have 3 presentations to set the stage and present some of the context for the work we are doing in the Arctic Council. So the first presentation, which I will be giving on behalf of Alf Hakon, is on the international context, and then some of the information about the Arctic Council and the work in the Arctic Council. And in the second presentation, I will present some of what we think are achievements that we have made in the work in the Arctic Council. And then in the third presentation, Phil Mundy will then address some of the forward-looking aspects of the work that we need to be undertaking. And we have a crowded program, and now it's up to me to set a good example of keeping the time. And so Phil will help me, and he will flag me down in case I should run over the time. In this presentation, as I mentioned, we will provide some information about the international context, and starting by a reminder of why do we need ecosystem-based management or ecosystem approach to management. And some of the aspects of this are, there are major changes taking place in our ecosystems and in the societies that relies on them. We are in situations where we have multiple drivers for change. We have interactions inside the ecosystem, but also between the biophysical and socioeconomic spheres. And in these complex systems, prediction may be difficult. We have the issue of cumulative effects, a need to consider the totality of the impacts on the ecosystem. And for these reasons, we need integrated management of human activities with a focus on achieving or maintaining good status of the ecosystems. So there has been, over many decades, an evolution of global oceans governance system. And this has meant an evolution of rights and obligations of countries with principles supporting these rights and obligations. We have had the extended coastal state jurisdiction with exclusive economic zones. We have had development of sustainability principles such as the precautionary approach, the ecosystem approach, and the MSY, maximum sustainable yield concept in fisheries management. And so resulting from this is that we have a comprehensive global oceans governance system with many institutions at the international arena. The UN Law of the Sea Convention, UNCLOS, is the basis, is the international law that regulates activities in the ocean. And in that legal document, there is an obligation to consider that the problems of ocean space are closely interrelated and needs to be considered as a whole. This is in the preamble. So the word ecosystem approach is not used, but it is clearly that this is meant by the preamble of UNCLOS. The World Environment Summits, starting with Rio in 1992, there is only one mentioning of ecosystem approach, or EBM. If we go 10 years until Johannesburg in 2002, there is more focus on this, and there is one statement to encourage the application by 2010 of the ecosystem approach. And I think this call for applying the ecosystem approach from Johannesburg was followed up in the Arctic Council in the Marine Strategic Plan that was prepared in 2004 for the Arctic Council work that included a strong focus on ecosystem approach. Then in the Rio Declaration from 2012, there is to effectively apply an ecosystem approach and a precautionary approach in the management in accordance with international law of activities impacting on the marine environment. So there are ongoing processes under the General Assembly of the United Nations. There are annual resolutions under the agenda point on oceans and the law of the sea. There is a preparatory process, the so-called informal consultative process that prepares for this General Assembly agenda point. We have the process on biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. We have the World Ocean Assessment that has been ongoing. And we have review conferences of the UN Fish Stocks Agreement as key sort of ongoing activities. So turning then to the Arctic Council and the role of the Arctic Council in the context of ecosystem approach to management, we will start by first giving some information about the Arctic Council. There might be some in the audience that are not so familiar with the Arctic Council. And so the Arctic Council is not a management organization, but it is a forum. And it is a leading intergovernmental forum promoting cooperation, coordination, and interaction among the Arctic states, Arctic indigenous communities, and other Arctic inhabitants on common Arctic issues, in particular issues of sustainable development and environmental protection in the Arctic. So this is what the Arctic Council is about. It is then political cooperation among 8 Arctic states and 6 indigenous peoples organizations, the so-called permanent participants of the Arctic Council. There are also observers to the Arctic Council. There are 12 non-Arctic countries, including China, Japan, South Korea, Germany, France, and the UK. And there are also intergovernmental organizations such as IUCN and UNEP, and there are non-governmental organizations also as observers. The Arctic Council has a rotating 2 years chairmanship. We are currently in the US chairmanship, and this will be followed in the next 2 years period from 2017 by Finland. The Arctic Council has 6 permanent working groups. I will not read them out, but we have heard AMAP, we have heard CAF, we have the PAIN, Protection of the Arctic Marine Environment, and 3 more groups that are permanent bodies under the Arctic Council. Then the Arctic Council are also establishing task forces which are time limited to deal with specific issues. So at present there are 3 task forces in work, one on Arctic marine cooperation, one on telecommunication infrastructure, and a third on scientific cooperation. And there is also an expert group under the Arctic Council on black carbon and methane. I should explain that the ecosystem approach expert group is at the lower level in the hierarchy of the Arctic Council. So we are established at the working group levels, whereas these task forces and expert group are established by the ministers of the Arctic Council. The achievements of the Arctic Council has been to provide a long-term commitment to study and assessment of the Arctic marine environment. And there has been and is a large number of activities which are relevant to understanding the status of the Arctic marine environment and drivers of change. And as a result of this, and as a result of other scientific research and other information gathering, our knowledge of the Arctic is vastly improved over the recent few decades. There are many relevant activities and many relevant publications resulting from them. And these are just some of them produced in the Arctic Council. There are the Arctic Oil and Gas Assessment, which we produced some years ago. Hidden in the right lower corner are the Arctic Marine Shipping Assessment, and on top we have the report from the Beepamar project, the report from the Group on Ecosystem-Based Management, and we have for the Ecosystem Expert Group workshop report and progress report, which I will briefly mention later. In the ministerial meeting in the spring of 2015 in Iqaluit in Canada, there is one paragraph on the ecosystem approach where the ministers recognize the multiple stresses and the need for an ecosystem-based approach to management. And they welcome the further progress towards implementation of some of the recommendations from the Kiruna meeting 2 years earlier. And then they request the development of practical guidelines for an ecosystem-based approach to the work of the Arctic Council. So those are some of the last point or something we will discuss at this meeting. The Arctic Council has also now agreed an Arctic Marine Strategic Plan for the time period up to 2025. And this plan was prepared by the PAIM working group. And in that, there is a strategic action to advance EBM as an overarching framework for conservation and sustainable use of living and non-living resources in the Arctic marine environment. So there is a strong statement of commitment to use the ecosystem approach in the Arctic. So what could then the Arctic Council's role be when it comes to the more specific items of implementing ecosystem approach? And as mentioned, there was already a substantial number of projects that relates to this. But we could think about a role of the Arctic Council in assessments, particularly as we are going forward with integrated ecosystem assessments, development of methodology, common methodologies for various aspects of the work, monitor the implementation of the ecosystem approach, and provide a forum for exchange of experiences. Now, the ecosystem approach is science-based and requires scientific and other knowledge. So this is critical. And for the integrated ecosystem assessment, we realize that we will need more information than is commonly collected. So this requires a comprehensive and long-term monitoring and research, and there need to be a commitment for funding for that into the future. And finally, we have the importance relationship, the important interface between science and the policy, the management. And this is something we also need to think through. How should that interface be? As a scientist, I have a perspective that it is important to safeguard the integrity of the science so that we, with maximum usefulness, can provide advice to the wider community and to the management and the political system.